We've now got two interesting and very different speakers to take us through to lunch as we explore the theme of what it means to be human in the digital world. Now, being human in the digital world, as some of you will know, is a theme that we've plagiarised from our first speaker, who explored it over a series of really fascinating interactive discussions in her 2017 Boyer Lectures. If you haven't already listened to them, I'm sure you'll be inspired to do so by the end of her talk. Please welcome to the stage, from the 3A Institute at ANU, Professor Genevieve Bell.
All right, no pressure then. I'm not quite sure how you follow all of that conversation, but I realised I was going to take us in a slightly different direction. I did want to start by acknowledging that I'm always happy to be back on Gadigal land, and I want to thank both my translator and the transliterator up the back there, who I promised that I would speak at less than 300 words a minute. I'm not sure I can accomplish that, but I've had no coffee. So I wanted to pivot the conversation here and stop talking specifically about AI, but about its consequences, and take the conversation, if I can, up a level. And I wanted to do it by using this wonderful chart from the World Economic Forum as a straw person. Kathy had an earlier version of this. This one comes from 2016 from the World Economic Forum, and it was their attempt at that moment in time to organise the world. Now, of course, this is a delightfully deceptive graph. It suggests a number of things. It suggests a logical progression. It, in its full extent, has timestamps underneath of it. 17 to 1800s, late 18 to 1900s, 20th century, 21st century. Of course, we know that's not how this proceeded on a global basis. Many of those steps happened in 100 years, not 200 years. Some of them took only 50 in certain places in the world. And of course, no one of those moves erased the ones before it. So there's lots of ways you can take it apart critically just from its kind of worldview. Of course, for me, one of the most deceptive things about that worldview, though, is that it's missing something kind of important, which would be people. It has an enormous amount of things about technology in there, but what is notably absent is people. And here I want to sort of tease apart the difference between people as cultural systems, people as citizens of nation states, people as consumers of companies and services, and make a stake to suggest those are all very different things. But what is notably absent here is what might have been the consequences of any one of those moments in our history. Kathy started out by talking about the Luddites, which we know was in some ways a reaction to that first moment of mechanisation and industrialisation. Each one of those other waves brought with it different kinds of social reactions and social changes in multiple societies around the world, with incredible consequences for how we organised ourselves. It's also the case as we think about this next wave, which the World Economic Forum happily calls cyber-physical systems, which is delightfully vague. Kathy said intelligence here, and that's another way of thinking about it. For me, the most useful way I can think about this is to imagine what it means if you take that computation from the third wave and put it into objects. So imagine here that AI isn't what is that fourth wave, it is what powers it. In my naive, pre-caffeinated thinking, AI here is just the steam engine, and what is actually there is the train. And if you imagine that we should stop talking about the steam engine and start talking about the train and the railway and all of the consequences that that had metaphorically, you get to a different place. And so to my mind, there are 5 things that wave of technology that AI powers will have consequences for how we think about our humanity, how we think about our societies, our cultures, and our individual selves. And I want to just kind of tease each one of them apart. The first one, we've heard a lot of conversations about it here already, is about the use of autonomous as a kind of consequence of artificial intelligence. We talk about autonomous systems. Autonomous cars come up a lot, but there are lots of other autonomous systems. Chances are, if you've spent any time in Sydney, you've been in a building that has autonomous lifts. They're the really disturbing ones you get into that don't have buttons. And that we haven't yet worked out how to use, and which are remarkably not accessible if you have a visual impairment or almost anything else. Or, like me, you just get into whatever lift has opened and find yourself not going where you are going. Now, of course, autonomy is a term that has a delightful and complicated history inside a number of academic disciplines, none of which are mine. It is a term of art in philosophy and political science. It is a term that has a great deal of history, and it's freighted. It's also the case that when technology companies talk about it, none of them are talking about the same things. when Google talks about its autonomous vehicle project, when Volvo talks about its, when Tesla talks about its, each one of those projects is actually architected differently, instrumented differently, and managed differently. And for the rest of us, the word autonomy in English has this incredible semantic slippage. I say autonomy, it's not so far for you to go to hear conscious, sentient, and then it's coming to kill us. Now, of course, that word doesn't work that way in other languages, neither do its consequences, but imagining a world in which machinery has some capacity to act without reference to humans has a flip side question, which is what will it mean for us to be in a world where machinery is acting without asking? How will we signal that? Toby recently talked right here about what it was like when Google suddenly announced that they'd been conducting an experiment of having an autonomous system calling up human beings to make dinner reservations. Google was very pleased because that was a hard technical problem. Humans less pleased because they were being fooled. So how is it that you would build and flag systems that were autonomous so that the rest of us knew that's what was happening? Do you need to? And if so, what did that look like? Is that the moral equivalent of an L plate and a P plate, but now an AI plate? And would that solve the problem? And frankly, what will it feel like for multiple different social actors in multiple different countries to imagine that systems are acting without reference to us, knowing what those systems might imagine the right answer is? Which gets me to the second set of challenges for these new systems, which is about the nature of agency. If you imagine that you have a system that can act without prior request, it has to have a rule set. It has to have some set of things it is allowed to do and not allowed to do. Who gets to decide that? How is that going to get litigated? How is that going to get regulated? Whose set of rules are going to be the ones that are being instrumented? Does that sit on the network? Does it sit on the object? And what will happen when you have two sets of rules in conflict with one another? Because now you have multiple systems operating simultaneously. And oh, by the way, how are those going to be made visible to us? Again, as citizens, as consumers, as cultural beings, how will we know what the rules are that live inside that object or that set of objects? And how will we feel about those objects having that capacity? And oh, by the way, because it's often the case that we build systems with the notions that they will endure for ages, how will those rules get upgraded? And at what moment in time and by whom? And then, of course, there is the inordinate question in all of these systems about safety. You heard a little bit about it in the last panel. But what will it mean as humans to know these systems are safe or reliable? Or how do we think about who is liable? Where does the set of risk live? How will we know they are safe for us? What will the tolerance be? I sat in meetings in Silicon Valley for nearly 15 years where there were conversations about what humans could tolerate in terms of risk that were at best disturbing. So how do we want to think about this, right? Who will set those parameters? How, again, will they get negotiated between individual systems? What does it mean to say the lift is safe, but the building isn't? And safe for whom? Who gets to decide those things? Where will it be regulated and litigated? And then there is this really interesting question, which doesn't come up a great deal when we talk about artificial intelligence or indeed the systems on which it will be built. But what will be the metrics by which we decide these are good or bad systems, or useful systems, or functional systems? The last 250 years of automation, of which this is another wave, has proceeded on the basis that automation was about efficiencies and productivity gains. It's the logic of capitalism, it's the logic of the machinery, at least at one level. What are the metrics we want here? You listen to a lot of people in the AI community, one of the promises here is improved safety, a better quality of decisions, fairness. Those are all also cultural values, not unlike productivity and efficiency. Is it about energy use? We haven't talked about that a lot right here, but turns out that, the world of digital is a world that is power hungry. It requires an inordinate amount of energy to make that cloud work and to make those algorithms run. Do we want to imagine that one of the ways we should think about this future is it is one that has to be energy efficient? Is that a way we want to think about what it means to have artificial intelligence that will only run certain kinds of algorithms if we can guarantee the workload is not power hungry? No one's asking that question, at least not aggressively, but probably we should. What are the other metrics we might want here? Is it about safety? Sure. Better decision making? Maybe. Is it about systems that don't trample on our human rights? Yes. But what are the other metrics we might want here, and how would we choose to articulate them? And last but by no means least, I think we stand in this really interesting moment of how it is we're going to relate to these systems. We can talk about artificial intelligence as a notion of computing and software and objects, but cyber-physical systems will be physical. There'll be the elevators and buildings and vehicles and public transportation systems and cars and other things. What's the interface going to look like? We've spent 60 years with interfaces to computing that were narrow and slender and thin. They were a piece of glass or a keyboard or a pile of punch cards. What does it look like here? I don't think we can talk about human-computer interactions anymore. I think we might need to think about a broader zone, a wider space, and the notion of what it might mean to think about relationships with these systems. And then again, relationships for whom, in whose interest, where might the power sit, and how would we think about it? So with that, I want to stop and say thank you.
Thanks, Genevieve. We'll have a chance for some more conversation with Genevieve shortly. But first, I'd like to welcome our second speaker, the last one before lunch. You met him in the panel session just before morning tea. Please welcome him back to the stage from Google, Jake Lukey.
Thanks very much. I feel that it's a bit unfortunate that I'm the last speaker before lunch. I'm feeling very happy you all aren't making any decisions about my parole or any other big things right now. So for this last session, I wanted to kind of switch the topic a bit and address one of what I think are one of the most interesting human challenges raised by technology, which is how do we deal with the uglier side of humanity in the online space. So I wanted to share with you a bit of an example from the YouTube context. So at YouTube, we've recognized for quite a long time that the real power of YouTube as a platform is its openness. So we know that all of the great things that it's been able to do, from supporting young talent to helping SMEs to grow their business to expanding education and lots of areas around the world, are all driven by the fact that it is so open and it is very democratized. But at the same time, we also recognize that this openness has a dark side to it, which is that many people are using the platform in ways that create harm in the real world through spreading hate speech, violent extremism, child abuse, these types of things. So for us, a big challenge has been how can we both use emerging technology but also to use more traditional methods of, one, getting at this bad content, but also trying to promote the more human side of all of us and address these issues at their root cause, i.e., how can we use YouTube as a force for promoting positive values rather than just getting at bad stuff. So just to give you a bit of a background, we have 4 core values at YouTube that enliven a lot of the ways that we think about these issues. You can see here, one is around freedom of expression, which I mentioned has always been very, very core to who we are. It's part of the DNA. But then also another part is freedom of opportunity and freedom to belong. And this means that people who are using YouTube should feel safe, should feel secure, to feel that they're not going to be discriminated against on the basis of their race or gender or disability or sexual orientation. So for us, trying to figure out how to reconcile these values that can sometimes be in tension with one another has been an ongoing and evolving process. We have what we call our community guidelines. These are the rules that govern YouTube. We don't allow any content that violates these guidelines. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is some of them. So it includes sexual content, it includes hate speech, it includes graphic violence, all sorts of things. And so we do have a team of people around the world working 24 hours a day removing this content after being flagged by users. But the problem that we found is that, of course, users flag some content, but users don't get at all of it, and they don't always get at it very quickly. So, and for us, another key challenge was that in terms of enforcing our policies, context is also really, really important, which is very, very difficult for both technology and even some humans to be able to flag correctly. And so just to give you an example of this, you can see the same image on the left here. It's from a CBS Evening News report, remembering James Foley, right, who is the victim of a terrorist beheading. On the right-hand side, though, the same exact image is used in a video, in a terrorist recruitment video. So for us, when we look at this content, we treat the case on the left and the case on the right differently, even though they're exactly the same image. Because the one on the left has journalistic value. It also has sort of the intention of the content is to memorialize him rather than to glorify violence in any way, right? Whereas the video on the right does not have that journalistic value and has a very different kind of intention and likely effect in the real world. So for us, as we started thinking about what could we do to make our systems a little bit more scalable, while at the same time recognizing the challenge of creating a scalable solution to getting at this harmful content, but also addressing sort of the challenges around context that I mentioned, we decided to start developing an artificial intelligence-based solution to flag content for us. So we piloted this initially with terrorist content. And what it does is we basically developed a machine learning-based classifier to flag content for us that likely violates our policies around terrorism and violent extremism. But because machine learning is actually still really, really bad at determining context, as I mentioned, we found that these classifiers, they were pretty good, but they weren't great yet. And as they were improving, we felt really, really uncomfortable with using them in ways that would do any kind of automated content removals. Because freedom of expression is really important, right? So even though it's easier in a way just to remove all the content that likely violates our policies, there would be a big cost to that in that we would likely over-censor and over-remove content. So the middle case scenario that I mentioned, which is kind of an example of AI plus humans that I mentioned this morning, is, well, we'll use these classifiers to flag content, but we'll still send it to human reviewers. Now, once again, our human reviewers aren't perfect. They make mistakes. We have an appeals process. We remove content. Sometimes it has to be reinstated. So it's not to say that humans are perfect, but at least it gives us that human accountability and someone who can kind of come in and look at these videos with context in mind. So what did this solution enable us to do? What it has done is allowed us to get a lot more content and a lot more quickly. So you can see here, this is data from Q4 of 2017 that we were able to remove 8.3 million videos that violate our policies, and 6.7 million of those were flagged by machine learning. At the same time, it allows us to get content before it's viewed by people, which was obviously a problem in the past when you have to rely on user flags, right? So what this shows you here, 76% of the videos that we did remove didn't have any views at the time that we removed them. So it also makes sure that the real-world impact of this content is not sort of any bigger than it needs to be. Finally, this is just a deep dive on one issue, which is violent extremism. You can see here on the far right that most of the content now, since we implemented machine learning, has been taken down with fewer than 10 views, which if you look at the same period from Q1 of 2017, a majority of the videos had 100+ views by the time they were taken down. So for us, this is a really, really powerful solution at getting at the bad content in a way that takes advantage of emerging technologies while also trying to respect our values around freedom of expression. But I also wanted to highlight, because of the focus of this around really staying human in the digital age, the technology is not enough. Because all that we're doing here is we're putting a Band-Aid on a problem, but we're not addressing the root cause. If you take down hateful content, people still have hateful ideas in the offline space, and they're still going to act on those ideas. So we've spent a lot of our time thinking not just how can we take down content, but also how can we amplify the positive voices out there? How can we support YouTube creators who want to, one, give voice to groups who maybe feel stigmatized, who feel marginalized? If we think about it in the violent extremism context, we know that a lot of people are radicalized because they feel like they don't have a voice. They're young people who are in circumstances where they feel like that they are marginalized, they are discriminated against, they don't have a voice, they don't have a community. So how can we make YouTube a place for them to also find the types of people that they can connect with, and also find positive role models, and find a sense that they themselves can express who they are? So this just shows you one of the reasons why we wanted to really focus on that we've done quite a bit of research showing that YouTube videos and creators really are making a big impact on young people. So for that reason, we created this YouTube Creators for Change program, which is working with ambassadors from our creator community around the world at trying to, one, develop content that addresses these issues, but two, to mentor the next generation of emerging creators, and to establish partnerships with NGOs, civil society organizations, academics who are real experts on the issues, to design content and to design campaigns that are likely to actually make an impact on the target audience, and to try to measure that impact better. So I just wanted to show you, to end my talk, a video. So that's hopefully a more positive way of ending lunch. We could cue that up. This video basically starts, we're not going to show you the whole thing, but it starts by this creator who's a young Muslim man in the UK talking about how after September 11th, he spent a lot of his life in the UK being called a terrorist, how he really felt like he didn't have a voice in the society, how people viewed him based on the color of his skin and his religion, and he wanted to create a community online for people, for young Muslims in the UK and around the world to find an alternate way of expressing themselves and finding a voice and finding a community. So we're just going to show you a little short clip from that video now.
You, my would-be fighters, you're not a fighter if you spend more time moaning on your sofa or complaining online or not thinking creatively out of the box. You're not a fighter if you're reacting or proving yourself to others. The fight is within. The fight is making sense of all the good we have and building. Build a new culture. Build for the future. Build. That's the real fight. When the world's against you from all sides, you have to be more. You need to be innovators, thinkers, change makers. We can't let others dictate what we can and can't do, what we can and can't talk about. No more playing ball with their ignorant agenda. We're gonna set a whole new agenda.
No one's gonna set the standards or the parameters of who you are.
You see, we're only in our creative infancy because of our history. Stripped of everything, our parents had one priority, and that was food on the table. So they made you doctors, lawyers, bankers.
He's doing medicine at Cambridge.
Yes! Idiot! He should be doing PhD!
But I'm saying enough, because as a result, we're creatively illiterate. We need visionaries, chasers of passion and pushers of boundaries. Our future will be decided from creativity and culture. We need you. I learned it takes a community to make progress. But will you fight to build it? Since I started Benny, my life has been filled with inspiring people, challenging experiences, and moments beyond this little guy's wildest imagination.
Hello.
And trust me, you don't need money, fancy equipment. You just need a great idea, work together, and a fire. You just need to get up and do it. Get up and fail. Get up and just keep trying. Remember, the haters are watching, but we're on a high-speed train and it's not stopping for nobody. The time is now. Will you fight for the future?
All right, we've got a few minutes now for a bit of discussion between Genevieve and Jake before we all release you for lunch. Your right to sustenance. Look, there was a bit of a theme I was observing there about relationships and connectedness. And in a way, it's one of the great benefits that people often talk about in relation to technology, is that it's made it easier for people to connect who may not otherwise have ways of connecting with each other. So I wanted to just sort of pull that apart a little bit. I mean, one aspect of it is the relationship between people and technology, which is something that you touched on at the end of your talk, Genevieve. How do you sort of threw it up there as a question, but I want to push you around whether there's an answer, which is, what do you think that relationship could or should look like in the future?
So I think the reason I want to use the word relationship is I want to get away from thinking about interactions as the only possible paradigm for how we will engage with technology, because it suggests something incredibly, narrow and thin. And when I think about, maybe that's how you engage with a mobile phone, right? I mean, at one level, that is a narrow interface. It is right here, you type on it, it's small. I'm not sure that an interaction is the right language or even sort of disciplinary practice for thinking about what it would be to have an interaction with a lift or something that you get into that's smart and autonomous, or a building that you live in. Interaction just doesn't feel like an expansive enough term for me there. And I really was trying to start to think about what are the other values that you might be able to bring to the fore if we talked about them more as engagements or relationships, something that meant that you had to think through who you were, not just in the moment of the screen, but before and after that. And for me, there was something about whether that let us then think about different sorts of metrics. So it didn't have to just be about efficiencies again. It didn't necessarily have to be about the number of clicks, but there were some other possibilities there. And so at least for me, the word relationship, I suspect it's designed to be a provocation as much as anything else. But that said, I mean, humans in many different cultures have had relationships with inanimate objects. Whether they were, in fact, animate, not human objects too, right? So I think we've gotten down to imagining that we only have those with other humans and then only certain categories of humans. But the reality is we've anthropomorphized things, we've had animistic cultures. not everything that was human was the edge of our sort of world. So for me, I want to kind of bring back those possibilities. That was a really not helpful answer, wasn't it?
But do you think we're already partway down that path? I mean, without over-disclosing, I mean, there's technology I use that makes me feel happy and technology that makes me feel angry, and I almost feel like I have a relationship.
I feel like I should ask about that. Well, listen, we know that in some levels there are interesting ways that the emotional landscape is being activated here. One of the things that we always used to see when we were doing ethnographic research, looking at people's relationships to data, was that we were pretty clear in my social science research days that we knew we'd hit a privacy violation when people used the word creepy. And they used it in multiple contexts, right? It spanned across multiple cultural contexts. And when people said creepy, we inevitably knew that what had happened was the system knew more about the human than the human had anticipated the system knowing. And that sitting inside that kind of notion of creepiness was also the idea that the system was making a judgment about them. And so you'll see companies, Google's not the obvious one here, but Netflix would be. So I don't know if any of you have noticed over the last 12 months in Netflix, now when content is provided to you as an edited selection, here's a thing we think you might like, Netflix has taken to adding the tagline underneath, because you watched blah, blah, blah. And the reason they did that was for a really long time, content would turn up in people's content streams and there'd be no reason for it to be there. And one of the things Netflix found was that their customers were profoundly made anxious about the fact that basically the set-top box had opinions about what they wanted to watch. And it felt like it came out of nowhere. And so that was an attempt to manage, effectively make visible the work of an algorithm by suggesting this isn't magical thinking and this is not in fact creepy. A series of your actions have made this next set of possibilities. And you can argue about the rightness and wrongness of that, but I did think it started to suggest that interfaces doesn't get it done for us anymore. There's more going on there, right?
I get a Netflix category called dramas involving strong female leads.
Well done.
Netflix hasn't explained that to me, but I don't think I need to explain. Jake,
I think I have that one too, actually.
some great stuff I could recommend. Jake, you talked about connectedness in the sense of almost activists in a way, as one of the things you talked about, in that you talked a little bit about bringing positive voices, amplifying positive voices, I think was the term that you used. There are lots of people in this room that would probably like to be one of those positive voices that gets noticed and promoted on, say, YouTube. What advice would you give them?
Well, I am not by any means a media expert. We do have a team of people I can connect you with if you really want to know this. But and we have some great resources for NGOs and civil society organizations who want to try to use YouTube as a platform to get out and get exposure. So you can definitely share those around if folks are interested. But we do have this campaign that I mentioned in Australia. It's called Share Some Good, is the local version of that. And so we've run now a bunch of workshops with NGOs and creators around the country, trying to create content that's targeted specifically at the Australia content issues.
And look, the world encompassed by Google is a big world, right? And I see, partnerships that Google invests in. So there's one that I'd seen recently, someone mentioned earlier about partnering around trying to preserve Indigenous languages in Australia. How do you choose projects or partners like that when you've got a world of choice?
Yeah, this is one thing that we are trying to build a little more structure around, because we have lots of interesting projects, ideas that come across our desk through various staff people, knowing someone who works at a research institution or someone who's got a great idea from an NGO, or it sort of varies. So it depends a little bit on where we have interest from our research team, but also where we really see that machine learning can make a big difference. So even if it's a project that our team's not that interested in to begin with, if it's something where we think machine learning could really be leveraged to make a big impact, we'll take it. So the project you're mentioning around the preservation of Indigenous languages emerged as a partnership with a research institution based here in Australia. And so we have a big team based in Australia who have lots of contacts, and so the idea emerged from a contact at a research institution.
And Genevieve, what would you like to see Google do? I mean, if there was one issue, this is where I have fun, like no warning about these questions. If there was one issue where you think Google could do something to advance human rights, or one step it could take, what would it be?
Listen, I think one of the most interesting challenges that Google has, and the last time they tried to recruit me, this was the conversation I had with them, was I actually think that the way the search algorithm works and the way algorithms work more broadly is that they reproduce history. So when I think, we can talk about whether data is important to AI moving forward or not, and we were having that conversation on a sidebar over there. But the reality is that one of the things about data is that it's always retrospective, right? Data is what already happened, so it is past and it's stable. And the reality is we are building systems on top of that data. Whether they reproduce themselves or not later doesn't matter so much. But the way that search works now and algorithms work now is that they're predicated on what the data already says. So if you are looking for, I don't know, whatever the thing is, right, any recommendation engine, it's at one level inherently conservative. And it's actually the interesting thing about AI, right, is that it is past looking. So what does it mean to think about a recommendation engine, you who likes aggressive female leads, good for you. There's something interesting about imagining what that would then source for you moving forward, is that that's the only thing you'd ever see, because that's what you'd already picked. And so there's this interesting challenge about how is it that we will have a moment or a possibility of being surprised or challenged or discomforted even, if what we have is a set of algorithms that can't help but reproduce the past. And so one of the challenges with the way machine learning proceeds currently, with the way we use the math that underlies AI, is that it can't help but reproduce the past as it has already been because of the ways in which it works. And so for me, one of the challenges that I made to the nice people at Google back in the day was to say, what does it mean to imagine developing an algorithm that isn't one about recommendation, but one about surprise or challenge or wonder or discomfort? What would it mean to say that rather than reproducing similarity, we should actually be able to reproduce difference? And that what would it mean to think about systems that did that might, for me at least, be an interesting way of starting to move out of stabilizing the past as though it were the present and the future that we want. Because I don't know about you, but the past we've had isn't the future that I want at all.
Looking at the future, what a fantastic positive note to end our session on.
So I was just thinking lunch.
Please join me in thanking Genevieve and Jake. We are now breaking for lunch. A reminder, there are additional toilets near the bar or on levels 2 or 3, and we'd like to see you back in here in time to start again at 1:50. Thanks, everyone.